Grab your woman, it's a Louie Louie time.
Tonight on Sports at 11, the reunion continues. From the Casper Energy Studio in Calgary, the four neat guys.
I think you guys all know that not everybody enjoyed Sports 11, watching Sports 11. We had a lot of people who loved it. Our ratings for the first number of years were very good. But as you know, we had guys who were saying, what the heck is that? A lot of guys in the media, a lot of people just didn't like it. We had a lot of athletes. Maybe they liked the show, but they saw something on the show that really upset them. Do you guys have any, and I'm thinking of guys like Doug Gilmour, Jillian Richardson, help me out here. Normie Kwong and his wife, maybe. Can you guys name some other ones and we can get into those?
Russ Parker, the owner of the Baseball Cannons, wasn't a big fan of Sports at 11.
Let's start with Doug Gilmour.
Yeah.
And you can tell us about the incident in the hallway at the Saddle, but what did he see? Did he see something on the show once that peeved them off a little bit?
Well, Mike, why don't you set it up? Because you were the brains behind the Doug Gilmour top 10 reasons
it was
why
the top.
Doug Gilmour was holding out. And get this, Gilmour, remember back in the 90s, he was holding out from the Calgary Flames, and he wanted the grand sum of $850,000.
Wow.
That's chump change now. They wouldn't embarrass themselves for playing for that kind of money now. But back then, he was holding out for $850,000. And we just thought this was crazy. And, Mike, we did a top 10 list of why Doug Gilmour was holding out on the Calgary Flames, and it kind of spiraled from there.
Why he needed more money, and I think Mama needs new shoes is what pissed him off. But don't forget, Doug Gilmour was a big fan of the show. In fact, he told me many times, he goes, I want to be on your show when I'm done playing. That was when he was still with the Flames.
That's what I'm saying. There are some guys who didn't like the show.
Yeah.
But there are guys like Gilmour who liked it, but something he saw. And the top 10 list was one of the big reasons why guys were upset.
That and Mike confronting him down the hall about that conflict he had with Joel Otto.
Yeah. Well, see, it started with the top 10 list, guys.
Yeah.
He and his first wife. Sorry, Doug.
How many has he had?
It was his first wife, though. I'm not being smart here. It was his first wife, right? Well, remember, she got really upset by that top 10 list, and she called the TV station. This was in the time before social media and Twitter and that kind of thing. So when people were upset with the show, they'd literally get on the phone and call us, and we'd man the phones. And Gilmour's wife, what was her name, Robin?
Yeah.
She
Sounds
called
right.
the station, and she just gave it to us. And Mike, you're right. Doug was a guy who came on our show a lot back in the old days. He did a lot of things with Sports at 11. And she got on the phone and she says, you bleepers, bleep, bleep, bleep. Doug does this stuff on your show, and he's a big friend of the show. And you do this. And in the background, you hear Doug going, yeah. So he was really upset about that. I think Robin was most upset about it. Well, then he did get traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs in the big trade. So the first time Gilmour came back to the Saddle Dome to play against the Flames, it was obviously a big deal. And I just happened to be the guy who was covering the post-game reports that night. So I saw him at the morning skate, and I'm kind of leery because I'm not sure how he feels about Sports 11 anymore. And I see him at the morning skate, and I go, well, hi, Doug. And he goes, hey, Tolter, how's it going? I said, oh, we're okay. But then the game that night was really passionate. And the Leafs ended up losing. It was a hard-fought game. Gilmour was in the middle of everything. And you're right, Mike, at the end of the game, he came into contact with Joel Otto. And I happened to be sitting up near the Flames front office guys in the press box, guys like Al Coates and Mike Burke. And Gilmour kind of thrust his stick at the end of the game against Joel Otto. And all the Flames guys jumped up and said, how can he do that? He speared Joel Otto. He won a cup with Otto. How can he? Blah, 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 blah. So we go down the dressing room after the game, and nobody's really asking the tough questions. Now, that was the thing about Sports at 11, guys. We asked the tough questions. So I waited, and then I asked Doug Gilmour about the incident with Joel Otto at the end of the game, and he went absolutely nuts. He said, told you never played the game, blah, blah, blah. I think he was just looking for an opportunity to get mad at me because of the Sports at 11 riff that we had earlier. And so the funny thing is, I turned to Brad. What was Brad Thompson, one of our old photogs. I said, Brad, and I was just doing this to kind of bug him. After Gilmour went off on this tirade, I just turned to Brad and I said, Brad, you got all that on tape, right? And Gilmour went, you son of a... And he came and he hit me against the wall like this. And there's this big scrum of people, and I'm down on my knees. And through this maze of people, I see Cliff Fletcher down the hall. And, of course, Cliff was the GM of the Flames. Now he's the GM of the Leafs. He's the one who pulled the trigger on the big Gilmour deal. And I see Cliff Fletcher, and all of a sudden he turns and he sees this commotion, and he goes, Dougie! And he starts running. And I'm down underneath this maze of people. I'm thinking, Cliff, Dougie, what about me? I'm the one who's getting killed down here. But I think he thought that he had to stop Doug Gilmour before he slugged the stupid sportscaster and got suspended or something. So that's the Doug Gilmour story. And still to this day, when I go back to Calgary, people say one thing to me. Hey, Mike, have you heard from Gilmour lately?
That's a great story.
To finish it up, I saw Gilmour years later, and we kind of patched things up because Gilmour was always one of my favorite players to deal with on the Flames. Yeah. He and Gary Roberts were my favorites, and as we talked about, he was a big fan of the show. And
so he was on it all the time. He came on live all the time.
Yeah, that's exactly. Right. He used to come on our show live all the time. So I was glad we patched things up after all those years.
Mike Lonsborough, talk about Jillian Richardson. Was she a former Olympic 200 meters sprint?
How I got to know her, my roommate at the time dated her.
I don't hear about your history.
No, I'm telling you, so it sets the whole story up.
I'm going to plug my ears about this part.
Welcome to Three's Company, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Long story short, I knew her, but remember when she went to, it was either the Olympics or the World Championships or whatever it was, and she missed curfew and she went dancing. So we did a top 10 list on her. She was a very volatile person. She didn't like us. And as I said, she dated my roommate, and we'd have her over for dinner. She'd load up her food and go into his room, close the door, and eat by herself. So she wasn't a real pleasant. But I remember Mike Toth and I were meeting downtown to go see a Sylvester Stallone movie, and we were meeting at Tin Palace. And I walk into the Tin Palace, and it's like walking into one of those Old West movies when you're the new guy in town, and it goes dead quiet. I look at this one table. Here's Jillian with all of her family staring at me. And I just kind of back out, and I said, no, there's no way I'm going in there. And I come out, and here's Mike Toth hiding in the telephone booth. And he goes, I knew I wasn't going to go in there without you. Yeah, she hated us.
The other one I wanted was Larry Kuharich.
Yeah.
Lonsborough, remember you went and you interviewed him, and we tried to get him on the show, and he wouldn't come on the show. I guess he wasn't a big fan of us.
One of the reasons he wouldn't come on the show is because of his and my affiliation. When he first became the head coach of the Stampeders, I was the media relations director for the team.
Okay.
And he and I never saw eye to eye on anything. I took him to the commissioner's office because he wanted to shut his locker room down to the general public and to the media after each game all the time.
Yeah.
And he couldn't believe that I got the commissioner on the line and got it straightened out. And then he was so angry at me, he grabbed me in the hallway one day and threw me up against the wall and was going to punch my lights out.
I do remember that now,
the
Rob.
general manager had to come, Earl Lunsford had to come and tear him off me and save me. Still, he couldn't believe that I quit over Kuharich's contract. And he was angry at me. And about a year later, I saw him at Longhorns. And Jimmy came up and he said, I just want to apologize to you because he said, you were so bang on about Kuharich being the jerk that you turned out to be and how he treated us afterwards. He said, I can't believe that I never listened to you.
Remember you did that interview, Grant, and he didn't show up, and you had an empty chair and say, Larry Kuharich, we're waiting for you. So I went to practice after that, and he said, I'm not going to go do that show with those assholes. And then it turned out that he didn't like me, and he wasn't going to come on the show if I was on. In fact, they had a little weasel named Kevin Gallant that was their PR guy, and he comes up to me after and he goes, I'm going to tell you one thing here. If I were you, I wouldn't go into the locker room after a loss. And I said, why? He said, because Coach Kuharich said, if you or Larry Tucker go into the locker room after a loss, he's going to hit you. And I said, tell him not to miss. And then I said, better yet, maybe you should wait till next week. My sister's in town. She handles my small fights. That was a true story. I mean, he was I was glad to see that guy gone. It turned he was a brilliant mind, but he had
no social skills.
No people skills whatsoever.
We're criticizing a lot of people, but to get back to Grant's original point, let's be honest, we weren't a bunch of choir boys either.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
Guys, I think from some of the stories we're telling, you'll get that. Like, for instance, with Russ Parker and the Calgary Cannons, Russ's situation was he always wanted us to cover the Cannons just like we covered the Stampeders and just like we covered the Flames. We couldn't do that because the Cannons just weren't as big as those two other teams, but Russ never quite understood that. But the mistake that Russ would make with us, bunch of cocky characters, is he'd complain about the Cannons coverage one week, and we'd say, remember in the newsroom, we'd say, oh yeah, Russ, you didn't like our coverage this week? Check out the coverage next week. How do you like that? And we wouldn't go for a week, and we'd all laugh. Why did we do that? Because we could do that, because we were the people in town, but we were also a bunch of cocky son of a guns. Let's not lie about that.
When the show started, and you guys, you'll know who these two characters are, because I sat in I do an impersonation of one. I'm not going to mention his name, but Toth got into a verbal fight with one of the guys at McMahon, and then this guy. So the show had been on for a month and a half, and it started to take off. And I'm sitting between these two guys, and the one guy looks at me, and he goes, yeah, I saw your new show. Yeah, music and highlights, as if that's got a chance of staying around this town. And you know who I was, but...
Why would Ralph Klein hate our show so much? I don't...
He loved our show, actually. Remember?
Ralph did like it.
Remember when I had him in the luge, and I said, look it's 10 pounds of Jell-O in a 5-pound bag.
It's a great line, Mike.
And he came back, and he said, that was a great line, kid. That was a great line.
But we also weren't afraid. I remember Lanny McDonald getting upset with us because when the Calgary Flames changed their uniforms one year, we got a tip from somebody in the sporting goods industry, and he actually sent us pictures of the Flames' new uniforms. And so we had...
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, we were going to run those pictures before the Flames news conference announcing their new uniforms. And we did it because we said, hey, our allegiance isn't to the Calgary Flames. Our allegiance is to our audience. And Lanny McDonald got so upset with us because he was the marketing guy with the Flames at that time. But we weren't afraid. Yeah, we were a little bit too big for our britches sometimes. But we were passionate and we weren't afraid.
Yeah. I was going to stop this segment there, but I want to bring up one guy who really peeved me off, and we had to make a public apology to him and the team. And I'll let you guys take it over too, Larry Rickman. No, because of the Doug Flutie situation.
Yeah.
Now you fill us in because he let you know that the Stamps were going to get Doug Flutie, correct? Yeah. But he wanted some pre-publicity, sell tickets or whatever, correct me if I'm wrong, and then he promised us you can get him the night before the news conference on Sports at 11. Have I got it right so far, Mike?
Yep.
And then the night before, he wouldn't let us have him. And we lambasted him. And I think I was part of that. I was so upset about that. And then, of course, the Stamps and our marketing, our sales staff, the station had to apologize. I don't know about you guys, but I heard Mike Toth read the public apology on the air the next night, and I was so upset.
Why did I have to read it? Because I was the kid of the bunch? How did I get elected?
But well, you and I were on, yeah. I made you do it.
Because you weren't on the Stampeder beat, that's why.
Yeah. Right, that's true, yeah. That is true.
No, you and I were on that night, Mike, and I was down at the Saddle. I'm doing post-game, and you were back at the station, so you just had to read it. But Lawrenceboro, was that not the story, and Rickman made our station apologize?
So what happened was Rickman gave us a tip that Flutie was going to be at this restaurant before the press conference the day after. So he said, yeah, you can catch him. So we waited outside, and I went into the restaurant, but he wasn't there. He was just there because Wally went in, and I think Ron Rook went in, and we waited, and Flutie wasn't there. But Rickman also promised Doug Flutie the number 22, which Tom Forzani owns and is retired. And so I went and did an interview with Tom, and I said, Rickman wants Flutie to have your number, and you're not going to do that. And he goes, no way. There's no way I'm going to give it up.